You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Well, hello and welcome to TFM's local books and comic show, and I am just one of the hosts, Matthew Rushing, and I'm so excited this week. Casey, we have an incredible show for everyone.
Yes, we do. We are going to be talking to John and Maria Jose Tenudo about their new Making of Star Trek II book, and I can't wait for that. It's a great opportunity for us.
Yes, it's going to be phenomenal. I can't wait for people to hear it. Before we get there, though, and before we even dive into the news, thank you so much for listening. Please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and that way you'll be able to hear every episode as soon as it drops. And of course, right now, too, if you give us a review on Apple Podcasts in the U.S. store, you can be entered to win a copy of Patrick Stewart's memoir, Making It So. Casey has an extra copy, so we would love to send that to you. So get that review in by the end of November so we can do our drawing and announce who the winner is and get that out to you right there around Christmas. Of course, you can also find us all over social media. We're on Twitter at Trek FM. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. We're on Instagram at Trek FM. There is the listeners only discussion group called the Babel Conference. You can talk to listeners from all over the world by joining, and you can go over to Patreon at patreon.com/TrekFM and be an associate producer with Literary Treks and the network, like Casey Pettitt and Greg Rosier. Please go over there and do that. We would really appreciate that. And again, that's Patreon at patreon.com/TrekFM. So, Casey, we've got a couple of different comic reviews here before we dive into our feature, and one is the Holo-ween series. We're actually going to just talk about the entire series because it's finished now, and I'm really interested to hear, what you thought of this one, because in all honesty, I remember just the fact that this was coming out and thinking, oh, this is a very interesting idea that I think could go sideways very quickly. So on a whole, what did you end up thinking of this miniseries?
Well, I don't think that I'd say that it went totally sideways, but and it's a fun thing. It's very timely as we record this. It's the day before Halloween, and so it's kind of fun to get themed, fiction, I guess, for that. So in that vein, it is fun to have gotten to read this so close to the time of year that it's actually referencing within it. I don't think it's necessarily going to hold up well if you want to read this mid-year or anything like that. But, it's a fun attempt at, just a holodeck adventure in the Next Generation series run. And, I think, overall, I do feel like this does kind of suffer from kind of IDW trying to do too much, like we talked about last time on the show when we had just a whole slew of new comics. And, so overall, I guess I'd say this is one of the ones, for me that lacks something. I'm not entirely sure what, but, it was kind of fun for what it was trying to do, but in the end, it didn't really add anything for me to the Star Trek lore.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more about any of that. I think one of the things too is that it probably should have just been 3 issues instead of 4. I think that they kind of dragged it out too long by giving it 4 issues. And I think, like you mentioned, in the sense that it doesn't go completely sideways. And I think they actually create the best version of it they can with the villain that they create to kind of give it this Halloween feel. I think that was really wise for them to do it in that way. And so it made it feel as quote unquote realistic as possible as you could get it to create this type of story. Obviously this is very much, a convention they're using so they can kind of have the Halloween theme, which in some ways is rather forced, I think, for Star Trek in the first place. And so, but all in all, I think it becomes as good as you could possibly expect, really, with this. Yeah. And so, I guess it's probably a mixed bag for me in that way. It's probably 2.5 out of 5, Holo-ween characters, because really, I think it's trying too hard to fit a convention that doesn't really fit Star Trek in general.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it too for me, because one of the things we like to talk about with the comics is they're able to do a lot of things that we couldn't get on the show, which they're certainly doing here. But to do some of the things that they do with our characters like Picard and Worf and Deanna and Riker, without giving too much away, if our reader or if our listeners want to read this series, it's just stuff that it was reminiscent of the Gold Key comics in some ways. It was just a little bit left field from, I think, where we would normally see our characters go. But, being they, like you mentioned, they had a great villain that they brought in for this to really kind of lean into the Halloween nature of it. And yeah, I couldn't agree more that if they'd wrapped it up in issue 3, issue 4 was completely unnecessary, bringing in the sidekick villain, I guess, that they did. And yeah, I think for me, it would be 2 out of 5 sidekick villains from the 4th issue.
I love that. Well, we did also get Star Trek 13, which is the ongoing series there. And this is the follow-up to the Day of Blood and kind of kicking off where we're going next with these characters. And so I'm really interested to see what you thought of this as we launch into the next part of this series.
I actually feel similar as I did to the Defiant one that we talked about last time. This one's called Glass and Bone Part 1, and it's similar to the Defiant issue. It's really a transition from that Day of Blood into this new storyline. So it's like, if this was going to be like a standalone kind of mini series, this would almost be our issue 0, which is just really setting up what's going to happen. And I think that they did a pretty good job in this one, where we're still kind of coming down, I guess, off of Day of Blood, and our characters are kind of almost resetting themselves and themselves are trying to figure out what they're going to do next. Cisco is, kind of getting ready to go back to the Celestial Temple and be with the prophets, but Starfleet comes in and says, "We still need you," which was a pretty clever little way, I thought, of keeping him around and making sure that he sticks around. We got some more, kind of more focus on some of our other minor characters like Ensign Sato. Tom Paris gets to step up quite a bit in this one. And, by the end of this issue, for me, especially with who they bring in at the end, I thought, we're still in this place with this Star Trek, ongoing comic series where, I don't know, I feel like they're hitting their stride and really kind of finding these characters and figuring out how to use them the best way they can.
Yeah, I think you said that so well, and honestly really summed up everything that I was feeling reading this. part of this whole series really is about the way in which they utilize so many different Star Trek characters from so many of the 24th century series. And I think they do it incredibly well and make it really interesting. I liked even the reference to Star Trek Insurrection that we got in here, with the Admiral talking to Sisko. I thought it was interesting, too, the way in which we deal kind of with the fallout for different characters from this experience, like with Sato or even with Crusher and her kind of ignoring Picard's calls, and just what that means for their relationship and her in general as a character who's growing. And so it's incredibly fun to be reading this series because in a lot of ways, as amped up and crazy as it is, I do think you can truly tell that the writers here are big Star Trek fans who really do know these characters, so things don't feel completely out of place for these characters and what they're going through. So as I have been with this entire series, I'm really looking forward to where we go in this next arc, and what happens with these characters and where we take them. It's been a series that I've just continued to enjoy, which I'm very thankful for. And I hope that, this next run will kind of live up to the potential that I think that this issue hints at, especially as we go and look at something that we have never seen pictures of, really, I don't believe, which is the Zenkethi, and maybe really getting a chance to see what they look like and their interpretation. So, phenomenal. So I couldn't be more excited to where we're going to go next. But Casey, I think we have talked enough. I think it's time to jump into our feature with the Tenudos. Well, Casey, we have an incredible lineup today, and I'm just so excited to be able to cover this. Of course, recently we had the brand new book about Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan, come out by the Tenudos, and I'm just so excited that both John and Maria Jose are here today to talk about this book with us. Welcome back to Literary Treks.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, first, I kind of wanted just to set the stage for everybody. And both of you, I know, have been Star Trek fans for a very long time. And so I'm just kind of wondering what your history is with Star Trek and what got you into the series and what has kept you a fan for all of these years.
Well, I'll start because I'm older. I guess I'll start the older guy here. We'll go back in time. I was born, the original Star Trek was on TV, but I was a little too young to see it in the original running. But I was very much kind of that person who came in through the animated series back in the 70s and through the reruns, on TV. Was a huge fan by the time the motion picture came out. Really discovered there was a whole world of Star Trek beyond just the TV show when I went to see Star Trek II at the Esquire Theater on June 4th, 1982 with my dad. It happened really by accident to go on opening night. And that's when I discovered the whole fan world, because everybody there was a true believer. So it was a really energetic, wonderful experience for me. And that's how I got into Star Trek originally.
And your mom got you the Mego toys.
Yeah, I had the Mego toys when I was a kid, and still have them.
That's
still
awesome.
Play with them. Have them right now. Played with them this morning. No, no, I still have them. I still have my mom. She got them at the Montgomery Ward Bargain Basement in Chicago, which people from Chicago may know what that is. But it was sort of a side outlet store, and they used to have all these great things. And my mom got me that there, and because I liked science fiction, I had liked Planet of the Apes a lot. And then of course Star Wars came along. There's before Star Wars and after Star Wars. So before Star Wars was Planet of the Apes and Star Trek.
That's
I knew
awesome.
of Star Trek Next Generation. I mean, how could you not? It was so popular. It was everywhere. My brother would have it on, so I knew of it, like in passing, but I didn't get into it until I met John, and I was working on my graduate paper, and he was catching up on Star Trek Deep Space Nine at the time, and I would hear in the other room, I would hear these words like "pa wraiths," and I would poke my head out, and I'd ask like, "What is this?" And slowly I got like sucked in, and I had to watch it. And he showed me the movies in a particular order. We started with Star Trek 4, and that's what his recommendation is for anybody who's new to Star Trek. Start with that movie. And so then we watched in a particular order, and then I've come to watch every Star Trek, and I love it. I love that you can watch a show when it airs and you can see it as one thing, right? It's a story about, let's say it's a story about like healthcare. And then like 10 years from now, you can watch it again and you can, because so much has changed in society and the zeitgeist, you can watch it and you could see something else in it. So it's so timeless and universal and such great stories. So I love using it in my class. I show segments of it to my class on different topics. So I use it a lot.
And I knew
Yeah,
that
that's awesome.
she had been converted to the true faith when we were getting married 25 years ago, and we were picking out. They had DJs back then, actual DJs at wedding receptions, not just an MP3 player that your cousin brought, slap on your phone. But so we were by the DJ's house, and you had to pick out your songs and what order you wanted, and he had a big thing of records. And Mary Jo, without any prompting, said she wanted us to walk into the Voyager theme. So I said, okay. I said that was when I knew that she knew the greatness that was Star Trek.
He chose wisely. That's fantastic. Well, John, you mentioned, a little bit of your history with Star Trek II, but I know that for both of you, this has kind of been a passion researching Star Trek and specifically Star Trek II. And so I was kind of wondering as we were, getting into the book, what was it that had really captured your imagination about understanding the history of this film specifically?
Well, I think there was a couple reasons we went into it. One was, well, besides the emotional connection we have to the film, as being what Star Trek II is. One really was our goal was to sort of celebrate the behind the scenes artists, to celebrate the people whose names people see on credits who may not necessarily either understand what they do, or maybe they don't always get credit, because certainly I think a lot of attention in Hollywood is always on the actors and actresses, which is certainly fair, certainly bring a great deal to a film, and they're the face of the characters and so on. But we wanted to really focus on the writers, on the writing process, the directing, stunts, hairstyling, makeup, areas of Star Trek II that hadn't been covered as much before. And that was really one of our first sort of passions, was to make the credits come alive. So that's sort of a pet peeve of ours.
I wanted to add to that. So often, especially on TV, they will push the credits off to the side or run them really quick so you can't even see it, you can't read it. And so we think it's a crime that all these people who worked on it, they're not being seen.
And so it's, to us, it was a chance to really to do that, to celebrate and highlight those. And then also, of course, we have a deep affection for Ricardo Montalban as a person. We've done a lot of research on him. Just his whole life. His family is really wonderful in letting us do that research and giving us access to certain materials and just share it with our students. So it was a chance to do a little bit more too with Ricardo as well.
And the book really, it had to get done now because we've lost so many people, and the longer you wait, there's not going to be as many people who were there to ask questions of.
Yeah, that really was one of we wanted to approach the book almost like a piece of sociology research, where nothing was said in there unless there was a source for it. And then also to do some myth busting. That was part of our big our big mission. Although, mistakes creep into everything, into every book and every documentary and everything. And also there's just mistakes of memory that happen too when you're asking somebody what happened 40 years. Do you remember this day 40 years ago when you were doing your
Right.
job? I might have remembered every detail of it because I'm a fan, but for people where it's their job, it's like anyone else being asked what their job was like 40 years ago. So, but that was one of our things. We really wanted to like break myths and see and answer certain questions, that as fans, we ourselves always had, and was it ever a TV movie, at any time officially, in production as a TV movie? Those kinds of questions we wanted to answer.
And would Leonard Nimoy only take it if Spock died? I thought that was kind of an interesting one too, that we've all heard that rumor.
And really not at all in his mindset, right?
Right.
That was brought to him as an option. He had wanted to be involved, but it did not want it to be Star Trek the motion picture either.
Right. Yeah, I definitely appreciated getting a lot of that background of those the producers, the writers, like you said, the hairstylists and everybody, because some of the names in there were familiar. I mean, just from watching the credits or whatever, or just hearing interviews with certain people that were prevalent at the time, between Harv Bennett or Jack Sowards, I think is one of them. And but getting a little bit more background into them was great. So I really appreciate that. One of the people that you had one of those little kind of Starfleet archive or personnel files was Gene Roddenberry, who a lot of people may not know wasn't as involved. He was actually an executive consultant on this. And I wondered if you could talk about, kind of your discovery into his process, when they were making a movie based on his work.
Yeah. As soon as Star Trek, the Star Trek the motion picture really did very well at the box office. I mean, it was a financial success. The problem was it had cost a lot to make. And it was also a very challenging project. I mean, it really was a Herculean effort to bring back a TV show. No one had done that before, right? To do a TV show from 10 years before, bring it back, and to do it in such a large way. So, they really deserve a lot of credit for what they did with the motion picture. It was, and produced under the time constraints that it was produced under and so on. So, but, when they were going to blame someone for the problems of it, the blame got placed on Gene Roddenberry for that. And so, the idea was, if we're going to move forward with it, we don't want to have the same type of problems occur on the sequel. So, he was, working on a sequel. He had ideas and he was generating sequel ideas, but then he was sort of moved out into that, as you mentioned, case of the executive consultant. Now he took that role seriously. So he produced many pages of notes on all the different versions of the script, and dealt with, and really I thought just fascinating, because it gives you an idea of what he thought of Star Trek, what he thought for the first time of someone else really doing Star Trek, although he wasn't that involved in the third season of the show either. But to see Star Trek in its sort of maturity and as a cultural phenomenon now, what this creator thought of different characters and so on. And I thought for us, one of the most interesting things was how he wasn't that, he would point out when there were inconsistencies, canon inconsistencies, but would always say, we want you to know that we broke those every week too. Like there's no way you can do this and not break these rules that you set for yourself or the set for the universe. You just can't do it. But he was a lot more concerned sort of with character and protecting the characters. And I think one of the mythologies was that he was sort of given this role, given a pile of money so they could put his name on it, and which they do in Hollywood a lot, right? They'll call someone an executive producer on a movie and they have nothing to do with it. They're basically being paid to not say something negative about it, right? And to have that name attached. He didn't approach it that way. He took it very seriously, and they they took him seriously. They took his suggestions. There were changes made because of what he wrote. So he did contribute, I think, a lot more than people think.
I think that's such an interesting thing to have happen, and obviously it's an interesting shift for him, because with each successive film, he'll kind of be less involved, and part of that, just becomes to his health continues to start to decline, throughout the 80s, which is always a terribly sad part of the whole story with him. But I think one of the things I was really impressed with in the book is the way in which, we kind of get a new captain, in the sense of, Nicholas Meyer comes in to be the director. And I think I was really struck by how well both of you were able to frame the story of what he actually does for this film. And I think what he does is that it becomes completely about what Roddenberry cared about, which was the characters. But unlike the motion picture, which, the more I see it, the more I fall in love with that movie, because I do think there's a lot there. But I think one of the things is that Meyer was able to tap into the humanity of every single one of these main cast members in a way that I think even in many ways sometimes retroactively helps me see these characters in that light. Like, I think Star Trek II put a pin in exactly who every single one of these characters were. And that's the genius of what Nick Meyer was, I think, able to do with 5 different scripts, pulling that all together, because that was his main focus. And the rest of the plot had to revolve around what the character story was, which is what actually makes, I think, a good Star Trek story, really, or any story in general.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think he absolutely, he approached here, which is, I think, it made more remarkable his approach by the fact that he didn't know much about Star Trek, right? He is,
Right.
He was telling us that, when he was in college at the University of Iowa, he had a professor who made an assignment where the students were supposed to sort of watch Star Trek and then watch Mission Impossible. But the idea was you could watch Star Trek without looking at it. In other
Like
words,
if you listen to, like if it was a radio drama.
because it has that, it's very dialogue heavy. It's very character focused. It's sure there's a lot of action, but by necessity they couldn't show you much of it because of the special effects limitations of the time. So it forced a kind of character focus on the original show. Whereas Mission Impossible, there's huge segments that have no dialogue. If you weren't looking at it, you wouldn't understand what was going on. And so that was pretty much the extent of his relationship. He knew science fiction, for sure, H.G. Wells and so on. He was a huge fan of that. But he approached it more like sort of a naval film. But somehow he knew these characters. He understood the characters, and I know he talks in his own book about that they have a certain charm to them. And that if you tap into that charm, there's a charm to McCoy, there's a charm to Kirk, there's a charm to Spock. And if you tap into that charm, then you're really hitting at what the characters are about.
And he brought touches of realism to it. I mean, he acknowledged that these characters are aging, and just small little touches like the exit sign, little bits of realism.
Yeah. Well, he had quite the job ahead of him, too, with the multiple versions of the scripts that existed at the time that he came on board, to where he basically had to go and try and figure out what was the best parts, I guess, of each script, like what all the beats were that they wanted to have. And I mean, to come in and then not even take a writing credit, if I remember correctly, like he, put all these disparate elements together and figured out what to keep and what to get rid of. And I think that would be insurmountable to some directors, especially ones not already familiar with the material.
And it's in an incredible short amount of time, in less than 2 weeks. And really all the all the dialogue. There's a couple lines we mentioned it in the book here and there where a few of those are Harv Bennett. Harv Bennett Harv Bennett could coin a phrase. He was a good dialogue. I knew how to put sort of humor in there and things like that. But that script should have had his name on it. Absolutely.
Mhm.
And it should have been co-writing Jack B. Sowards and Nicholas Meyer. And of course, Samuel Peoples, we kind of track that in the book, but there are contributions that each of the writers who tried their hand at the script made. People's script was way out there. That would have been it would have been a totally no con. There's no con in People's script whatsoever. But there is Savick, and it's a little closer to the Savick that we know. So Peoples did contribute a very important element to the story, even though his script was basically unused.
I think that was one of the things too with the script and the changes that happened. That was part of the thing that I wasn't as aware of coming into the book. So I was really enjoying getting to see where they had started this script, which, was not just pulling from Space Seed, but a lot of other Star Trek episodes to kind of truly make this a sequel to the original series, which there were some of those changes where I was kind of lamenting that they happened, because I actually loved the idea of, pulling Kirk's love interest from the series, pulling back in the Romulan commander back in to possibly be, Savik's parent, all of those type of little touches, which are like, as a Star Trek fan, we love when they make those connections. But I loved getting a chance to read all of those different variations of the script, because I think it really goes to show just how much they wanted to make a switch from, what was done in the motion picture to something that felt more akin to the show that they were trying to, create a sequel to.
That's one of our favorite things to do, just as an aside, is to look at episodes and then look at the original scripts, see how the scripts changed over time. So, for example, the original series, This Side of Paradise, that was supposed to be a love story with Sulu, not Spock.
Yeah, we got to talk to DC Fontana a few years before she passed away, and get into why, and the difference of the Enterprise incident too was very different. Had the Romulan Praetor in there, so it would have been the first time we would seen that character. All the what ifs, I think, are always sort of fascinating.
Absolutely. Well, and that's something too. As we're talking about Nicholas Meyer, and we mentioned Harv Bennett, but I think this book does such a great job of just showing how irreplaceable he was. Because, he did the thing where he did the crash course to become a fan and to know the series. And really, I think, you can see his fingerprints then across the rest of the series. And without him, I don't know if things would have turned out as well. And he really is kind of an unsung hero in many ways for, of course, Star Trek II turning out the way it does. But honestly, all of the original series films that we get.
It's funny. There are a couple of things in the book that we had wanted. There was a limitation, right, on as there always is with page numbers, right, and Titan was word count, and Titan was very generous in letting us go. We requested to go more than the budget had originally been approved for, and they said okay, because so we were very happy with that. But because of that, a few things got waylaid that we wished we could have added more. We wanted to have more about James Horner in the book. Weren't able to get it in there. Plus, we had felt that Jeff Bond did such a wonderful job with his book that we would just be repeating his work anyway.
We couldn't find the images either. We don't know if there was ever a picture taken of James Horner conducting, scoring that music, because we have one picture, but it's the resolution is so bad.
And it's not even scoring. It's
I'm looking at it.
It's Harv Bennett and Nick Meyer and Jamie Horner looking over the score, and just like, a posed picture. It's a fake, it's a fake posed picture, and there, I don't think there was, because it was such a fast recording process for him. I don't think anybody took to, maybe they're in James Horner's archives or private photos or something, but we've never seen that. And that became an issue. A little bit more we'd like to have included about William Dornish and the editing on it. There were just a few things that we had wanted to put in there. One of the things has to do with Harve Bennett, which was I was friends with a woman named Val Yeager, who ran something called, it was a Mensa Star Trek group. So it was for fans who were Mensa members. And this is all, Val was one of those original series pioneering female fans, right? The Joan Winston era, the Joe Trimble, that kind of thing. And he had maintained a correspondence and friendship with Harve Bennett. And she was one of the several fans that Harve reached out to ask opinions about Star Trek, to learn about Star Trek. And before she had passed away, she had shared with us all their correspondence with each other, and her suggestions, his responses. We had really wanted to include those in the book, but we just didn't have the time. We were able to get Val's name in, and that was about it. But those are fantastic, and they show you how much Harve Bennett cared about doing this thing right. And the numerous amounts of people who he gave access to that script to, and whose opinions he sought, from fans to even professionals. I know Walter Koenig was asked to do a fan read basically on it, as somebody who had written scripts for Star Trek himself, right, in the animated series, and for other sci-fi TV shows. So Harve Bennett was just, Harve Bennett's, Robert Sallin, immeasurable contributions to the film.
You guys obviously do a tremendous amount of research, and like you mentioned earlier, you've done some work researching original series episodes too. At this point in your research for this book, and Star Trek II, is obviously a fan favorite movie. There's so much out there about it. I feel like this book that you two have written adds so much more to, what we already know and didn't know. But was there anything that was surprising to you as you were doing research about Star Trek II that, you were just super excited to get into this book so that the fans could know?
Well, one of our most commonly asked questions whenever we do like a presentation or at a convention, people, and this is kind of just a small one, but they always ask, is Montalban's chest real? And that's one of those myths out there. There's so many people who's like, oh, it's fake, it's a plate. It's real. We were so lucky to be able to communicate with his daughter. And it was like the day before she passed away. And she shared with us how he got up at 3 a.m. every morning and worked out for 3 hours to prepare for this role. And it shows. And I always tell people, go watch Fantasy Island. When you see him, there's episodes where he's like swimming in the ocean and you see him walk out of the water and you see that's his chest. His whole life, he was just very physical. And even older, he was born with a condition called AVM, which is like a massive tangled nerve endings on your spine. And that got aggravated in the 50s when he did the movie Across the Wide Missouri. That was the name of the film. And he was thrown from a horse and landed on his back right on a boulder. But later in life, he's in a wheelchair and still he's exercising. He's using the hand bike to maintain his upper body strength. And that's why in Spy Kids 3, the director, Robert Rodriguez, right? He made that scene where he confronts the toy maker and he's standing up because Montalban had that presence and he had that upper body strength. So that was one of the things that we were so happy to be able to interview her and to get that information. Oh, and the wig. Yes, we found out the wig, Khan's wig, ends up in Nicholas Meyer's film. Is it The Lieutenant?
Oh, Volunteers.
Volunteers, that's it. So the same hairstylist worked on that film, and so it's Khan's wig, but styled differently on the villain.
That's
It's
funny.
awesome.
Uh,
That's fantastic.
Oh yeah. So when you look outside of Kirk's apartment, when you see San Francisco, that is a small part of a larger mural that was painted for the Towering Inferno. And we wanted to get that picture. They rented that portion of the picture from, I think it was 20th Century Fox. They rented it from. So we wanted to get that picture in the book.
two of my favorite things I didn't know going in was what actually has to do with the apartment. Also, when we were looking at whether or not it was a TV movie or not, and looking at the memos, the book answers the question that, yes, it was. It was a TV movie of the week. Was planned to be a TV movie of the week. That's why Harve Bennett was brought in, because he was on the TV side. It got transformed into a film before Nicholas Meyer starts writing, but we have the memo, basically the memo that does the transfer over. This is now a motion picture. This is now what everything's going to cost. And one of the casualties of that was that when it was a TV movie, Kirk's apartment was going to be a 2-story set. So it was going to have stairs, and we would have seen more of his apartment, which would have been great, because I always liked his apartment. This is Pat. How can you not want to see where Kirk hangs out? On his. So that had to be changed because obviously everything costs more when you go to a movie. So that was sort of one of those things that was sort of lost. And the other thing that I really enjoyed learning was that really from Julie Nimoy, who contributed not only the foreword to our book but also a remembrance of her father, was learning about what it was like for Leonard that day that he filmed the scene. That was, he talks a little bit about it in his book, but to get his daughter's perception, and because she drove him every day to the studio and was there, one of the very few people. There weren't a lot of people on the set that day, and she's one of the few people that's on the set, and to have that sort of firsthand account like that of somebody who isn't having to direct it, or act in it, and all the thoughts that have to go into that, but really somebody who's there as partially as an observer. And then it's your own father doing it. I mean, to me, that was really fascinating to learn about all of that. So just a little fun, there were, a lot of little fun little tidbits here and there that we learned, but we were very excited to share those things with fans.
And early on, when we got access to Nicholas Meyer's papers at the University of Iowa, was the whole Khan baby mystery. Like, who is the Khan baby? Is it really Khan's baby?
Yes.
And then in our book, we wanted to show there's a lot more pictures of filming that scene. They filmed that scene, or at least tried to film that scene. We couldn't get a lot of those pictures in there because it shows the baby's face, and we have not been able to identify who that person is. So we couldn't get the permission from the person to include it in the book.
So if Khan Baby is listening, the world wants to know who you were.
Yes.
You will be the biggest celebrity in Star Trek, I think.
Seriously.
If you could see the baby from the front, you can see why they call it the Khan baby, because it's got the same hair, and then they had a cute little open chest outfit.
It really looks like little Khan.
Yeah, it's just a mini me.
That's
mini
awesome.
me Khan is what the baby looks like.
That's fantastic. I mean, seriously, that person could make a killing at conventions.
Definitely.
I mean, you're missing out, Khan baby. So just let us know. I love the thought process too of you guys talking about the difficulty of trying to figure out what to put in the book. And was there, and you've already mentioned some great things, but was there anything else that you were thinking, oh my gosh, I just wish we could have added this because, it's an incredible story, or it helps shine a spotlight on somebody?
One of the challenges was, one, we were writing during COVID. So we weren't able to go to some of these places to access their archives. And then another is that it's so scattered. So Nicholas Meyer's material is at University of Iowa, and that we were very grateful to have all that material. But Fletcher's, the costume designer, his is at Harvard. So a lot of stuff is just scattered throughout.
Or in the hands of fans.
Yes.
I mean, we had to go to the fan community for several of the resources because they've, they're not always, they're not archived, right? The thought process wasn't there to necessarily archive things as much as they would be today. Well, I would have liked to have had more about that camera. The ILM was really great. Any special effects imagery in there, except for a few. All those pictures were courtesy of ILM, which was, a thrill for us to get to talk to Ken Ralston. It was like, you're getting two big franchises for the price of one, right? Plus a million other things.
Can we mention this photo?
Oh yeah, sure, too. And it was funny because every time we talked about the VistaVision camera with anybody, everyone's eyes lit up because it's such an extraordinary camera. It's an enormously large camera, heavy camera. ILM at the time owned some of the very few of them. They may have been the only ones to own VistaVision cameras. They were used back in the old days to do, the camera actually has what movies it filmed on the side. And Nick Meyer was able to say, yeah, that camera was used to film this movie. But the reason that heavy camera is needed when you need to maybe say have Kirk walk across the view screen, so that that there will be not a single shake of the camera, even imperceptible, and it helps the special effects artists do even better work using that kind of camera. And so, I mean, it would have been great to get into what happened to that camera. Where is it now? Does it still exist? That would have been a fun thing. And Mary Jo, I know, has a favorite.
Yeah,
too.
there was a photo we wanted to include of Lucille Ball with Charlie Bluedorn, and we were very surprised that we were told we couldn't include that.
Yeah, we wanted Lucy in there as a little bit of a nod. We were so excited. We were actually watching an episode of the Lucy Show, which was, oh no, I'm sorry, Here's Lucy. So there was I Love Lucy, then there was the Lucy Show, then there was Here's Lucy, right? And she was on TV for almost 20 years straight with a couple year break. Well, there's a couple of Star Trek things within there. One is you can see the Mugatu costume in one of the episodes of the Lucy Show, I think it is. Yeah. And Johan Prohaska, who does he did the Devil in the Dark, he did the Mugatu. He's in a lot of the costumes. He's in a lot of the Lucy episodes. Anytime they needed an ape, he was in there. But there's an episode of the Here's Lucy where she actually says Star Trek and is talking about the show. And we were just like, yay, that was so great to hear her say those words, and be referring to the actual. It's just something like this looks like a reject from Star Trek or a rerun of Star Trek or something like that.
Yeah, she's referring to
rerun of Star Trek. Machine. So, which is kind of neat because that show was on in the early 70s, which shows you Star Trek was already still in people's consciousnesses and growing. It was becoming mainstream, where it's winding up on all these sitcoms, even in the early 70s. But we really wanted to have Lucy at least represented in the book, and Charlie Bluedorn, because it was him. It starts with him saying, "No, we're going to make this." When everybody else thinks, "Why would you make that?" When the first one didn't catch the fire you wanted it to make, but
it was out of our control. It was a rights issue.
Yeah, there were, and same thing with like Robert Fletcher. We would like to have had a picture of him in the book, but it was just tough to trace down some of the rights to pictures.
It's interesting you missed mentioning Bluedorn because Paramount Plus did the show The Offer about the making of The Godfather, and of course he's a big part of that, being the president of Gulf and Western, and so to hear his name and kind of have an idea of him a little bit more than I would have was really cool, and so neat that he was the champion of making sure that, this happened, that Star Trek continued. And like you said, without him saying that, we might not have ever had a Star Trek 2.
It's the only reason. I mean, in some ways, it's while a totally different position. I wonder where, regardless of what people's feelings are of the J.J. Abrams films, I wonder what Star Trek would look like today without them, right? Because at that time, I remember, yeah, and I'm sure we all remember that. All you heard was Star Trek was going to go on vacation. Star Trek needed a rest. People were tired of Star Trek. Franchise fatigue. That's all you heard. All you heard, and that it looked like it was going to be a decade or two before anybody would revisit Star Trek again. And it was really J.J. Abrams saying, "No, I want to do a Star Trek movie with Paramount." That they said, "Okay, well, then you do a Star Trek movie," because he could choose whatever he wants to do. I don't know how much of that was JJ and how much of that was, say, Robert Orsi and, his, the friends who had his ear, and that's the same thing with Charlie Bluedorn. If he didn't greenlight Star Trek 2, the whole trajectory of Star Trek, and not only greenlight it was like, we're doing it because it's his studio, right? And he was either going to say yes or no. And nobody was whispering in his ear to do it in terms of other executives, right? I think there's, if my memory is right, his wife was a fan and wanted another Star Trek film, that kind of thing, maybe, but not, that was his initiative, and really a big part of saving Star Trek and making Star Trek, what it became. No Star Trek 2, no Next Generation.
No Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home.
No Star Trek 4, which gets you Star Trek The Next Generation. Yeah, absolutely.
That's something that I think is so interesting about this whole thing, because, as much as people think of the one with the whales, Star Trek 2 puts this indelible mark on Star Trek in a way that has never been usurped. Like and Star Trek 2 sets the stage for what Star Trek really is, I think, in a way almost, in some people's minds, I think more than even the original series does. And it, like you were mentioning, it just kind of becomes this template for everything that comes after it. And that's, I think, the craziest part about this movie. Nobody can, it's like they've always now tried to, especially with films, they're always trying to surpass Star Trek 2. And it's, in all honesty, I think, the only one to me that gets even close is, of course, 6, because Meyer's not trying to surpass Star Trek 2. He's trying to just continue and finish his story. But that's just the thing that's so fascinating about this movie, is that its place really cements, I think, Star Trek fully in the zeitgeist in a way that just has never been usurped.
I think Star Trek 2 is about something, right? That's and it's about so many different things, and it's polysemic. So you can watch it, and Mary Jo had mentioned that, you watch Star Trek one week and watch it maybe a couple years later and it means something else. I remember how Deep Space Nine took on a whole new meaning after the September 11th, right? The concept of what that means, and I think that that's I think great science fiction, right? Is ones you could watch Planet of the Apes and it could be about technology, or it could be about race, or it could be about both, or it could be about a million other things. It could be about speculative biology. I mean, it's there's so many different things. But I think Star Trek 2 has so much going for it, because if you sort of respect the audience and you tell you stick to a good story and you tell a good story and you don't explain everything, except that which needs to be explained to make the story work.
And you honor your characters. You don't change them.
Yeah, you keep it. I mean, you're not. They didn't recast. They didn't change anything, but they matured them, mm-hmm. which is different, right? So they showed you them at a different place and at a different time, but you still recognized Kirk as Kirk, except one that was sluggish, right? He was sluggish and maybe a little bit cocky, right? In Star Trek 2, that was that through line of hubris in there, right? And with those glasses and not wanting to wear them, and there's so much going on. It's only when he gives up that hubris at the end that he sees his way through and he finishes. And to give the hero a flaw like that, it's just great writing, right? And a flaw that's not like cemented in any time period, right? You want to make it be where it's about the general human condition, so lots of people can watch it and understand that. Star Trek is best when it isn't timely, and by that I mean it isn't reflecting actual news events, but rather is referencing the general human experience, which includes, obviously the things that are going on in the news.
And it introduces younger, new characters without sidelining your main characters.
That was something Force Awakens struggled with, right? They how do you get people to like these new characters, yet at the same time give them enough screen time, right? But you have older characters who are the ones that people are lining up to see. And I think they were very smart to by pairing people right away, right? They paired Peter Preston with Scotty. They paired Saavik with both Kirk and Spock, right? She gets a little bit of time with both. You got Yalcum with Khan. That whole theme of everybody has a child in this film, and has, whether it's the Enterprise has its cadets and Khan has his followers, or Khan has Yalcum, which is sort of symbolically his son, maybe his actual son, maybe not, but no one knows. And Kirk has David, and Carol has David, and that's something that every human on the planet understands, because people have parents and people have children.
One of the things I love that, because, and I think you guys are both touching on something that is incredibly important in Star Trek specifically, is that when Star Trek is its best, when it's most timeless, I think is when it leans into its Shakespearean nature, which is it creates those timeless themes out of the milieu of our society now, but the things to which we continue to see play out over and over again, and that's what creates its most indelible nature. So, and for me, in many ways, as you were talking about him watching Deep Space Nine, and you have to keep peeking your head in because, like, what's that? Well, that's where that series, I think, was honestly the best of Star Trek, because it's the one that's the most rewatchable, because it's the most removed from being a reaction to what's happening, yet at the same time can be laid over centuries of human history, and you can see the themes playing out, because they're themes to which we as human beings, and the human adventure, as Star Trek is all about, struggles with the most. And I think that's where Star Trek is at its best. So when it fails, it's when it's not that. And I think that's, as you guys were both touching on, that's what makes Star Trek 2 so beautiful, is it touches on some of the most timeless human adventure stories, and that's what makes it last. And that's what has made, I think, the best of Star Trek last for so many years now, and will probably continue into the future. The ones that people remember are the ones that they can watch and see themselves in, even if it's 100 years later. And
very much so with I think with Star Trek 2, I certainly watched it very differently when I was 13, seeing it in the theater, than I do as a father, right? And as a man who's lost his father, right? I mean, so it means something different, right? Spock's death means something a little different to me now that I've experienced it many times throughout my life, as opposed to when I was 13 and I never really had experienced it before. And what you said too about timeliness, I this is only an opinion, and opinions are like about as worthless as seashells. But one of the problems I think that we face with some of the more modern tellings of Star Trek is the language itself. And when you use language that's from today, in Star Trek, it might play to an audience today okay, but it is not going to play well in the future. And
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it reminds me of we watch, for example, the Beverly Hillbillies, and there's a couple episodes where they have beatniks on, and they're using the slang of the day, and it takes you out of the episode when they do that.
And so I think that one of the things is to stay classical, as you were saying, sort of Matt, that idea of staying classical with the themes and with the dialogue, with the music, right? Everything. I mean, there's a reason, I think one of the original series certainly had an orchestral sound to it, but I think one of the sort of smart things that Rick Berman brought in to Star Trek was the idea of taking the music and making it maybe even more classical oriented,
Right.
because
Yes.
it plays. It can be any time period. I mean, Star Wars did that too, right? I mean, John Williams' music is just you could overlay that over a pirate movie, in a way, right? And it could work,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't matter, and that's what roots you emotionally. That's what roots you is the classical elements of Star Trek, is what roots you, because otherwise it's just how can you relate to something that's 400 years in the future? So by making the characters classic, archetypal, by making the language classical, by making the music classical, all of that, and to give it its own look and unique style, right? So I think, at least up until recently, again, Star Trek, you could watch Next Gen and nothing then or since, with maybe exception of Orville, looks like it. But Orville's designed to try to look like it, right? I mean, it's meant to look like that. When you watch the original Star Trek, there had been no science fiction that looked like that before. It had its own unique look to it, and those elements I think are important. Star Trek 2 has its own unique look. It stands apart from other Star Trek. At the same time, it's still the Enterprise. It's still Starfleet. You're still seeing logos that you're familiar with, and you're seeing some reused costumes from the motion picture, but you're seeing, I think, something there that's familiar yet seems more mature, and which is totally fitting for the characters.
And Star Trek 2 also works because you have such a worthy villain. He's a worthy opponent, and the audience has familiarity with him. We know him from Space Seed, and it's great to revisit like what became of him, what became of his people. And I think the casting too of Montalban, just from the beginning with Space Seed, was a worthy match for Kirk. You've got a strong person who's charismatic. He's a tactician. He's strong.
Remember Gene Kuhn's notes to Carey Wilbur, because Carey Wilbur, of course, came up with the idea for Space Seed, wrote the first version of the script. Fans of Lost in Space will know Carey Wilbur's name for a lot of those episodes. But and Gene Kuhn, what he told him was to build us a giant of a man, was his exact words, and to give us a villain who's worthy of Kirk. And I think Kuhn knew that this could be, for lack of a better way of saying it, this could be Kirk's Joker, right? This is. This could be the character who's the worthy opponent of the hero, and really challenges the hero. And I think that's what Khan does, and because he's not just physically superior, he's intellectually superior, but he has flaws that Kirk knows how to, and Spock know how to exploit. Yeah,
there weren't really a lot of villains in the original series that would have been quite that. Theatrical for one, from just Montalban's performance, but even just worthy of putting in a motion picture like this. Trelane was essentially a kid, there's so many, that Kirk actually did defeat during the show that Khan was kind of a little bit of a loose end almost, like he was still out there, and it, was definitely a good choice on their part to use him.
Yeah, I thought really on the original show, the only other villain that he really faced that I thought was sort of equal in terms of that type of threat was Core, where Core was an intellectual Klingon, right? He understood how to, sort of, not that Kirk didn't face lots of challenges on the show, but the ones where you could see Kirk maybe getting beaten by would be Core and would be Khan.
Yeah, the only other one that I can think of is the Romulan commander. And of course, he perishes, but he was an opponent who thought and acted like Kirk. They had the chess match. And in many ways, I feel like that's an episode that also plays very much like what we get the naval battle of Star Trek II, right? Because that's the same type of thing that we get in this movie, of course, with the Mutara Nebula battle. And that, but yeah, I think that's also a thing we've seen in the struggle of creating more Star Trek movies, is them being able to find a villain worthy of, the main character, the captain. I think, that's why Star Trek VI works so well, because Kirk is coming up against the Klingon Empire, who's killed his son, and it allows for growth there again for the character. But it's also the reason I think that the only Next Generation movie that really works is First Contact, because Picard has a villain that has scarred him, has wounded him in a way that he can't get over easily, in a way that show never really wanted to dive into until we got to that movie. And so, that's, I think, one of the difficulties of making Star Trek movies in general, is that you end up with this conundrum of trying to craft a quote-unquote villain, because that's how movies work, whereas television shows can play out different types of morality tales that, people aren't going to want to go to the movies to see as much, and so...
Yeah,
but yeah,
I was going to say, if you're going to create a new villain, then you got to spend time developing that villain so that the audience believes that this is a worthy, believable opponent. And then when you do that, then you're taking time away from the character moments, which we all love and expect.
Which is why I think Star Trek 4, for all its comedic, the fun and the comedy of it, has a brilliance to it, right? Because the villain in that film is the situation, right? There is no villain except, I guess, time. How do we get back? How do we save? And if anybody's a villain, I guess it's the people of the present who are, destroying the Earth's future, that kind of thing, if you wanted to get into a message of some kind. But really a film without an antagonist, which you don't get. The Star Trek films seem to always want to have that villain, right? Partially because I think they always want to recreate. The first one didn't really have one. I mean, it had V'ger, right? But I don't know if you call V'ger a villain, right? V'ger was just an evolved, machine, a lost machine of ours. And I would call him an antagonist, V'ger, but I don't know if I call him a villain. But I think all the films try to get their own Khan. I mean, in some cases, like with Into Darkness, literally their own Khan. It's tough when you have, Ricardo Montalban and Khan as the hurdle you need to go over. That's a big jump.
Yeah. I feel like I could just sit here and talk to both of you about Star Trek forever, because it's so rich. But one of the things is we're kind of coming to a close. What was your favorite part of getting to put this book together?
Well, I think for me, it was a chance to celebrate, and for me to get to know even better the people who made the film. We were able to talk to, to Ken Ralston, to Judy Elkins, to Nick Meyer, who we've talked to before, but it was a chance to really get into, longer conversations. Laura Banks, who we had never talked to before, had really great, literally a great seats because she was the navigator of the Reliant. But she was there with Montalban every day, and to be able to speak with Nimoy's family and Montalban's family, and just, they're all just really, they were all generous. They just gave their time to this book. And to me, that was just a great thrill. I mean, if you whispered in the ear of 13-year-old John Tenudo and said, "You're one day going to write the official, 40th anniversary making of book," I would have said, "Okay, sure." And so it was a great thrill to be able to actually talk to people whose work we really admire, because we really do. I love the actors, and of course the characters, but I have a very strong affinity for the people who make the sets and who design the sets and who make the costumes. And to me, their contributions, and I think everybody, who's a fan, I think we all appreciate that. That's why you go to Star Trek conventions. They'll have behind the scenes people. We like to hear from them, because we are interested in those processes as fans. So it was great to just be able to highlight them for me.
Yeah, and I was going to echo that. One of our favorite aspects about going to a convention is to hear from people like the Akudas, the people who design and create the costumes, to hear all the effort that goes into it. And it really adds to, when you hear the stories of how things evolved and how they cast somebody or how they made a ship, or the costumes and some of the like hurdles they had to go through, whether it was time or money and repurposing things, you really get to see their creativity and their imagination. And that just adds more to, when you watch the show, you have a greater appreciation for it. And so as we were researching and learning that, it just gave us a greater appreciation for a film that we already loved so much.
And I'll tell you, the biggest thrill was to see what Titan did with it, because what the format you give them the book in is, we're selecting the pictures. It's in a Word document, and you're slapping the text underneath saying this is what you wanted to say underneath. And then William Robinson, who did the art design on our book, I got to say, it was like looking at a completely different book. I mean, it was different. He added so much and improved it. And we're very proud of how beautiful the book looks. And we think that the big size of it gives fans a chance to, because you don't see, I mean, there's something about picking up the book and looking at flipping the pages and seeing the image for real, rather than seeing it just virtually.
And what we saw when we looked at Nicholas Meyer's collection is just contact sheets. So it's sheets with just itty bitty little pictures that you have to like blow up to see the detail. So it's beautiful to see it this way.
So we got to see, we were very excited to be able to, one of our favorite pictures in there is a picture of what it looks like outside the bridge set. So not on the bridge set, but that's this literally like bowl, upside down bowl. And in fact, we had to like confirm that's what it was. We weren't 100% sure that's what we were looking at, because the image was so small that we had. And Nick Meyer is the one who actually confirmed, yeah, that's the bridge set, because he knew it. And, that was a challenging set. But when we got to see it big in the book, we were like, wow, it's really cool to see it, to see it like this. So we were very excited about that.
Yeah, it's definitely a beautiful book for sure. It was very exciting to, get a copy of it and flip through it. And it's just, I think it's going to be as timeless as the movie, getting to see all those behind the scenes shots and, picking it back up again. And it's a fairly quick read. I mean, it's just because you got all the pictures to kind of help you along. Matthew and I were talking before this about, there's a good mix of, the captions for the pictures of just describing what the picture is versus also giving more information than what's in the main text of the book. So it just adds so much to it. So it's going to be a great part of the collection for sure for anybody.
Thank you. Yeah, please. And make sure if you get the book, read the captions of the photos, because there's a lot of detail. That's where we were able to sneak in a lot of details, was in the captions because of the limitation of space. So we wanted to use every inch we could.
And I'm so glad you did. I think, like Casey said, this is a book that anyone who's a Star Trek fan is going to love. But not just that, but I think it's it's a beautiful way to get anybody who loves film to get behind the scenes of a picture like this that is, that changed history in film is fantastic. So for both of you, where is the best place to have people follow you so they can see, what you are both working on and what's coming up next?
Well, best place to follow us, you can do it on Facebook. So we're betraying our age. We're on Facebook. But if you just look for my name, John Tenudo, it's actually both our account. And we share it, and we share any talks we're doing. We just did a talk last week about Star Wars at the lot. We do a lot of free library talks, virtual library talks, things like that. We got one coming up about the Lone Ranger in December, the history of the Lone Ranger, and so on. Our big next project is going to be out next year. And it is for McFarlane Press, and it is a look at the making of the Star Wars NPR radio dramas. So it's a really wonderful exploration. We think brand new interviews with Anthony Daniels, Perry King, Ann Sachs, John Madden, who directed Shakespeare in Love, directed the 3 Star Wars radio dramas. And he's in the book with a new interview. Tom Vagley, Josh Farden, who plays Luke in Return of the Jedi version of it. And most importantly, it's not only about the making of those films, it's about the writer Brian Daley, who we tell the story of his life in the book. And he died of cancer. And there's a synergy between Star Wars and his life and his cancer and the radio dramas. And these radio dramas saved NPR, according to Frank Mankiewicz, who was the president of NPR at that time. And so it's a really wonderful story. And again, something from my childhood. I loved the Star Wars radio dramas, and it was a chance to explore. Now that's more of a prose book, so that's about 85,000 words. That book's a much longer book, but we hope fans are really going to like it. It's kind of a heartbreaking but beautiful story.
That's incredibly cool, and I cannot wait to read that. Having obviously heard the radio dramas, but also read his Han Solo books for Star Wars, and the impact that he had on early Star Wars fandom is actually pretty incredible. Because of course, the radio dramas were one of the easiest ways for people to be able to consume Star Wars again. It wasn't like today where you could just pop in the DVD easily. So that's fantastic. I can't wait to read that. Thank you both. One, the book is incredible. So I hope everybody will get a copy of it. But thank you so much as well, just for giving us your time to be able to talk through it.
Thank you. We love talking about Star Trek, so we've enjoyed this.
Thanks, Casey and Matt. We appreciate it.
Well, that was an incredibly insightful interview, and we're very grateful to John and Maria Jose for letting us take up so much of their time. And for the listener out there, we probably spent, almost an hour after that interview chatting with them. And, great people, looking forward to what they've got coming up in the future, and, wish them all the best with that, because I just want to see more from them.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that. They were incredibly generous with their time with both of us. And it means a lot that, of course, any authors come on their show and want to talk about their work with us, share themselves with us. And we're, right here at the holiday season coming up, Casey, and this feels like the perfect gift for any Star Trek fan. This book is incredibly beautiful. Casey and I were blessed to get review copies of it too, so thank you to Titan Books for doing that for us so that we could be able to cover this book. And honestly, can't wait for what's coming up next, because some great shows coming up for you here throughout November, so keep on a lookout for that, as we've got the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko coming up. But Casey, before that, if people wanted to catch up with you and talk with you about, Star Trek II or anything else that's going on, where would they find you?
Well, the best place is, or the best places are Goodreads, Letterboxd, Twitter, X Twitter, or Instagram. I'm at Knitting Trekkie. And then you can also find me, I do lurk around on Facebook in the Babel Conference, so definitely a good place there too.
And I can be found all over social media under the name MattRushing02, so just look at any of the platforms, type in my name. If I'm there, you'll find me. You can also, of course, find me here on the network outside of Literary Treks with the 602 Club, which is our show about all of the fandoms we love outside of Star Trek. And then, of course, you'll find me with more Star Trek talk on the Orb, Warp 5, the Artificial Tango, and Saddle Up. And last but not least, you'll find me over on the Nerd Party Network as well with 2 shows. One is completed. It's called Owlpost, about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series. And then doing Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. But, as always, thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.